Setbacks are a primary means by which we control what can be built on a site so it does not impact adversely upon its surroundings. So setbacks are there for the benefit of the surrounds. What we see here in this diagram is the neon as it was proposed back in August last year. Its configuration has changed somewhat, and its density is greater and its height is taller. But we see here the application of 45-degree angular planes up from Duplex and up from Helendale, and how they collide with the structure. This may seem remarkable, but on the other hand, here we see in the brown the development at the similar corner at Berwick and Duplex, where the development has satisfied the 45-degree angular plane, and then in the blue in the background we see the neon project and how much it breaks through the angular plane. It can be argued by neon that the site is smaller and therefore they could not meet this requirement. Here we see the neon site, and beneath it is a footprint of the original houses, the pairs of semis that occupied this site. To the right we see the library and how it is configured around this property, and to the north still are 3 houses that have not been acquired, and they will be the last 3 houses remaining on this whole block. In turn, this shows us the neighborhood in the dark green, which is a house form neighborhood that is supposed to be protected from development in the apartment neighborhoods through a transition is to occur when there are sites on its boundary, and the light green shows the streetscape, which in turn needs its protections from development. In this case here we see now a comparable site in width, again 30 meters, that is situated in the apartment neighborhood east of Yonge, and upon which has been developed 5.6 times coverage compared to what is being asked for here, which is 11. Interestingly enough, on this brown lot, this density of 5.6 was achieved because it was in an apartment neighborhood and did not require any transition. The purple block here shown is the minimum size of site that the current tall building guidelines in the downtown say are necessary before a tall building tower may be considered. You'll notice it is wider than the site, and that is to ensure in a corner site such as this that there are the setbacks from Duplex and again the setbacks from the adjacent property. When we put all these lots on top of each other, we notice that the neon is of an irregular shape, which again reduces what it is capable of accommodating. And we see in the brown the site in the apartment neighborhood across Yonge, and it is a regular form and somewhat larger and makes better use of this northern portion. And in the purple we see again that the neon site is too narrow. Now, as we look more at the setbacks, we have to go back and look at the library and understand that when it was built, it was this glass fishbowl panoramic view that looked out upon the flanks and the rear yards of existing houses. And those houses had setbacks, and they also had height limitations, so that besides having good view, they also had good skylight, and they had exposure to the afternoon and late day sun penetrating into the library facilities. Now what we see here are the setbacks that the neon project is proposing. A nominal setback along Duplex and Orchard View, none along the library side, and a small portion to the north adjacent to the remaining houses. Likewise, we can see here that the library is reliant upon the setbacks of these rear setbacks from the houses that had and do still front onto Duplex. And again, one should not underestimate the amount of space, because again the houses on Orchard View in the original configuration had setbacks again on their northern sides to the buildings behind. This provided an overall effect of a curtilage of space around the library that it could rely upon for this design. And if it was otherwise, then no doubt they would not have conceived of this solution for this significant community facility, the library. And likewise, one can understand when you're in the space that looking out over the rear yards of houses was very much a community thing. In those days, if there was to be an apartment building built on this site, it would be presumed to follow the zoning, which had a 7.5 meter setback requirement from the side or rear boundaries on the interior of the lot where the neon is, and this would provide for window views of the apartments, and one can see the reciprocity of viewing distances back and forth between the two. When we apply the setbacks from the rear and we look again at the street allowance setbacks and again provide for some stepping for the irregular portion at the north end, we can see that all this green area starts to articulate again a sleeve or a curtilage around what is the buildable portion of the lot. Now, if we look at the tall building guidelines, we see here that they call for a 12.5 meter setback per portion of the building. And again, this provides at least for skylight, if not sunlight, and if not direct view. But again, it does provide regard for the library implicitly in those regulations. Of interest here, if we look at the guidelines that have been developed for tall buildings as this new strategy evolves in the city, we have to remember that this site is not on a main street, it's not on an avenue, it's on a residential street. And these more recent guidelines call for, in this instance, that there should be a 3 meter setback from the property line to allow for residential on the ground floor and to provide a suitable setting that one expects in a residential streetscape. When we start to put these together, and again we take into consideration the setback of the tower from the streets, not just at the ground level, but then up above the base, stepping back again, we see in the end what is truly the slot that is provided for a tower to be situated on this property. And we can appreciate how this works for the neighborhood and how this works again for the library in terms of its space. And one should not forget for a moment that actually an apartment tower can be devised to fit into this confine, as what is shown here is the apartment tower at 400 Avenue Road, which has been an institution in the city for many years, just at the top of the hill above Del La Salle on the east side. Another condition of setback with towers is that you take the length of the tower, rotate that 90 degrees, and use that as a separating distance between towers. And what we see here is that the length of the tower proposed, when it is rotated, intrudes upon Stanley Knowles. And that is a subject of view. It's also subject to the amount of skylight that's permitted to come between buildings, and also the wind. Now, if the tower were a square profile, which is the most efficient profile in terms of casting the least amount of shadow and providing the most amount of skylight, we can see that in reducing the length of the building flank and flicking that around 90 degrees, it does satisfy better the distance between buildings. The other thing we have to always remember too is that the separating distance at a minimum, no matter how small the tower is 25 meters. One begins to see in the end that it may make more sense to actually look at how one can marry together the interests of the library and the neon site, and to work out a consolidation between the two that sees the tower intrusion upon the neighborhood reduced, and in turn lets the intensification of the library lands be accommodated. In this case, it is a matter of balancing the advantages of the setbacks with trying to attain the optimum amount of intensification with the least amount of impact. And in this case here, the bowl of the library at the rear is maintained. And in turn, where the tower portion in red sits on top of the library, this is only a two-story height of building with one story of parking below, and what would happen in that would be to actually redevelop that portion of the library to come up with a design that works.